broken ties. I'm sorry, sir. I made such a mess of everything, Alex said as he dropped into a chair. Mr. Today snapped his wrist again, and the scenes reappeared on the blackboards behind his desk. They watched Aaron shake his head, flip the light out on the blackboard that showed his room. The old man sat behind the desk and pressed his finger to his lips, looking disappointed and perhaps angry, but saying nothing, as if he were waiting to hear more. I mean, what was I thinking? I've ruined everything. A look of pure agony washed over Alex's face as he realized the extent of the trouble he had created. Oh, he groaned. I should have talked to you or Miss Octavia or someone, but I was so sure I could convince him to come, and that would be that, you know? Quill would wonder where he went, but they'd never guess. Then I just found out tonight what Will was planning to do, and, well, I went a little crazy. I had to beat him to Aaron, and I didn't think it through. I mean, he's close, Mr. Day, today, really close. He rubbed his temples and let his head sink back into the chair. And I know I should have done it. I was just so sure. I mean, we're twins. I know him, or at least I thought I did. I really thought I had him there. For a split second, there was just a flicker of something, like he wanted to believe me. But back when I was in his room, he said, Alex relayed the entire conversation, starting from the beginning. Mr. Today just listened and waited for Alex to finish. The look on his face changed as the story came out. And you know what? Alex asked. He's right. He did his duty to Quill, and I failed. And now I failed to do my duty for you, too. Alex slumped back in his chair, miserable. They sat in silence for a moment. Are you quite finished? Mr. Today asked kindly. I don't wish to interrupt until you've gotten it all out. Every last nasty bit. Alex looked up. He reported me. It was him. Way back when we were 9. He was already turning people in back then. Not just me, Megan, Samid, and Will Blair too. I never knew anything could hurt like this. Mr. Today nodded. I know you weren't the only ones. He turned in a great deal more than that. He did? Yes. Every year before the purge, I meet with Justine and go over the reports. Aaron has had his sights set on the palace for some time now. Alex shook his head, sadly. All this time, he said, I had no idea. Why didn't you tell me? Because it's hurtful, and you wouldn't have believed me. I guess you needed to see it for yourself. Mr. Today sighed. And once I saw the door and figured out what had happened, I too hoped you might have been able to change his mind. Alas, then his face brightened a little. I'm glad to have you here, though. Aren't you glad to be here? Yes, said Alex, but it still just kills me. How could he be so horrible? How could he be so evil without me even knowing it? He was like my closest everything. And I feel so stupid. I should have known. Back in the mud. He sighed. And what happens now? His voice grew fearful. We'll never know until it happens, Mr. Today said. But it's likely that Aaron will report having seen you, even though he promised he wouldn't. And it's likely that Will Blair will succeed eventually in getting his door finished. Which one of them acts first? Only time will tell. I'm really sorry. Come now, Alex. Let's be done with the apologies, Mr. Today said. Let me tell you, my boy, I admit to holding out the slightest hope for the twin connection in getting him to stay here. Once he walked in the door, I've witnessed that power before. But I should have known better. Mr. Today trailed off, deep in thought, and it was quiet in the room for several minutes. Alex, who was completely spent, drifted off to sleep in the chair during the silence. But he startled awake when he heard a growl at the door. Standing there was a most enormous gray wolf. Hello, Marcus. Claire said that you wanted to see me? The wolf's gravelly voice was as deep as a bassoon. Oh, I read that wrong. I have to rewind and do that properly. Okay, here we go. Standing there was an enormous gray wolf. It's been a while. The voice can be tough. Hello, Marcus. Claire said you wanted to see me. The wolf's gravelly voice was as deep as a bassoon. Mr. Today rose to his feet and smiled warmly. Gunnar, how good of you to come. I'm sure you recognize Alex Stowe. Alex, this is Gunnar. You may have seen him a time or two on your treks through the jungle? Yes, Alex said, remembering. He was a bit nervous, having the wolf so close, but he swallowed his fear and said, his voice shaking only a little, It's nice to meet you. The wolf nodded politely. Marcus, is everything all right with the children? The wolf's bright blue eyes shifted towards Alex briefly, and he left the rest of his questions unasked. Mr. Today looked puzzled, and then his face brightened. Oh yes, quite fine. No, I wanted to speak with you about matters of Quill, which continue to change by the minute. Aaron Stowe knows of our existence now. Do what you can to keep him in sight. I fear he'll share the knowledge with Justine within days, if not immediately. The great wolf nodded. Alex lowered his head, feeling fully responsible for it. And a favor, if I may, Mr. Today said. Of course. I think you should alert the jungle creatures to what's happening. If we should come to war, I will surely offer my protection for those that wish it. But if any feel inclined to fight with us, Mr. Today's voice was humble, I would be grateful for their help if it comes to that. Would you let them know? The wolf regarded Mr. Today thoughtfully. It would be better, I think, he said carefully, for them to hear it from one of their own rather than from me. Mr. Today tapped his lips. So it would, he murmured. I'll speak to Araya. He roused himself briskly and nodded, then pulled the 3D painting from the wall. He rolled it up swiftly and touched one end, and an iron band with a lock grew around it, holding it firmly closed. Mr. Today put it in a cupboard near the door and locked that as well. Alex knew it was for the best, but it was hard to see all those hours of work get locked up in a cupboard. You should probably do that immediately, the wolf said. He glanced out the big picture window in the lounge just outside Mr. Today's office. Alex followed his gaze and saw it was nearly dawn. He yawned despite his best intentions, but it had been a long and sleepless night. Very well, Mr. Today said. Alex, perhaps you'd like to catch a few hours of sleep before training begins. Alex jumped. Oh, yeah, of course. I must go as well, Gunnar said. Mr. Today smiled and followed the two into the hallway. Gunnar kept walking across the lounge, past the small kitchen, and into the room where all sorts of monitors and gadgets whirred softly. He hoisted himself on his hind legs and stood in the tube in the corner. Weird. It's a weird word. Weird. I don't know. I guess the gadgets are like buzzing softly. I've never heard that word before. Weird softly. Anyway. Take care, Gunnar, Mr. Today said. You also. Gunnar's body shimmered and blurred before it disappeared. Alex blinked and rubbed his eyes, not quite sure what he had just seen. There's a tube to the jungle? Mr. Today put his hand on the boy's shoulder as they walked down the hall towards the balcony. No, he said. That tube is quite different from any other. Please, don't ever use it. It goes places you wouldn't want to go. He turned around, pointed to the ceiling, and murmured, glass? Liquid glass shimmered down and froze into place, sealing the area. Mr. Today, Alex said, why don't you protect your office more carefully? I could still see the blackboards when the glass was in place, and sometimes the glass isn't up at all, you know? I know. I'm growing forgetful, the mage sighed. Alex, I have nothing to hide. I am the same as anyone here. I hold a few secrets, and those that need protecting are personal, and I keep them inside me, where no one can get to them. Just like Everyone does. He chuckled softly. I hesitated to put up the glass shield at all, but my most trusted friends overruled me. The glass isn't there to protect my office. It's there to protect the most creative students, like you and others, who are able to see this hallway, and to give me a little peace and quiet. My sleeping quarters are connected to my office, you know. That's how I heard you when you went through the magical door. Alex's eyes widened. He shook his head, amazed, puzzled, not at all sure what to say. And since he was sleep deprived after the emotional, eventful night, his thoughts were completely jumbled. They stepped out on the balcony, and Alex turned to go down the boys' hallway to his room. I have so many questions. Mr. Today smiled warmly. I have answers, but for now, he said, you and I will be better off getting some sleep. Alex nodded and stumbled down the hall into his room. Hey, Clive, you old curmudgeon, you, he grumbled. Wake me up in time for breakfast. Clive surfaced and glared. You look like a crud. You look like crud. Your mom looks like crud. Clive's gleaming nostrils flared. He melted back into the blackboard without another word. So, that was another good chapter. A lot of stuff happened in this that you should try to picture. So, like, I don't understand how this glass just comes flying down from the sky or something. He just makes glass appear. Maybe draw a picture in your language book. Draw me something to show one of these pictures that we've talked about today. Or even just draw me Gunnar and what he looks like, okay? That would be a good way to kind of show this chapter. Thanks, and I'll probably read you tomorrow. See ya.